once again, we are back with the next module of clause analysis. Now, what have we learned so far? We have seen the meaning of a clause. We have seen that a clause question comes with a complex sentence. We have seen the meaning of a complex sentence, that it is made up of the main clause and the subordinate clause. And we have also seen the type of questions that are going to be asked. And in this particular module, we are going to study the type, that is the first type, identify and analyze the clauses. So this is what we are going to do in this particular module. Now, steps. Simple. Students, in grammar, when you follow these steps, you can do any kind of a sentence. There's no difficulty in solving a grammar sentence once you know your steps very well. Okay? So what are the steps to identify and analyze clauses? All right, let's take them one by one. But before that, we are going to take these three sentences here. We shall understand the steps and solve these three sentences with the help of steps. Okay? Let's go on. The first thing, identify the subordinator and the finite verbs. Subordinator, students, how do we do that? Simple. You know, we are going to give you a list and we are going to give you also a code to remember that list. Very simple, students. List of subordinators. The commonly used subordinators can be grouped as, and remember here you only have to recognize the subordinator. So, let's see. W standing for all the WH words, what, which, when, wherever, whenever, wherever. So we have many WH words. Then we have H standing for how and had. We have A, and that stands for as if, after. T standing for the though family, though, although, even though. Then we have B, that is for because and before. And I standing for F. Then we have T, till, that, than. E, even if. S, since. And there again we have something else, that is U, unless, until. And S again, so that, such that. Students, how are you going to remember that? Very simple. Look at that code there. What bites us? If you remember this and then you learn, or rather just read 3-4 times all your subordinators, you will be able to recognize your subordinators easily. Now, assuming you have done that, let's go ahead. Identify the subordinator. So students, look at the three sentences. Quickly, let's do that. I knew that he is happy. Yes, that is the subordinator. The next one is when, and the third one is which. So we have identified subordinators. Now we go on to identifying finite verbs. We will underline them. Remember finite verbs, the verbs that show the tense. Now look at the first one, knew and is. Look at the second one, went and slept. So simple, students. Next we have was and flew. So here we have identified the subordinator and the finite verbs. Now we go to the next step, which is so important, students. That is to separate the main clause and the subordinate clause. Now, how are we going to do that? Very simple, students. Look at this. Subordinate clause starts with the subordinator. That is why you're supposed to identify the subordinator. And it ends before the second finite verb. Students, very important. Before the second finite verbs. Remember, we said identify the finite verbs. And in all these sentences, we have identified two finite verbs. Why? There are two clauses. One is the main clause, the other one is the subordinate clause. We have also seen in the previous module that every clause has its own finite verb. So, when you are identifying the subordinate clause, you start from the subordinator, you go on reading, you come across one finite verb, okay, take it, it's a part of the subordinate clause. But if you go ahead and you see one more finite verb, stop. Just close the subordinate clause before that. That is what the line means. Let's see it with these sentences. So the first one, okay, the subordinate clause is going to be that he is happy. How come? Because we start with the subordinator that and we go on till the end because there's only one finite verb, okay, and we end after the last word, that is happy. One finite verb is there, so that becomes your subordinate clause. So which is the main clause? the rest of it, students. And if you see in the main clause, I knew, of course, there is a finite verb there too. Look at the second one, starting with when. Now here, students, if you just go on till the end, you will find the whole thing is a subordinate clause. That is why specifically stop before the second finite verb. So we started with when and we stopped immediately after home. Not immediately before slept, because there's another word I. You can't put I in the subordinate clause, otherwise the main clause sounds very funny there. So you will take the I in the main clause because you need a subject there as well. Okay? So very clear, when I went home becomes your subordinate clause and I slept becomes the main clause. Next. Now the third one, starting with which, okay, we have closed the bracket after cage. Look at this. The subordinate clause starts with the subordinator which and ends after the word cage. Why? Because it is just before the second finite verb flew. So you end it over there. One more important thing to notice here, students, this subordinate clause which was in the cage is sandwiched between two parts of the main clause, that is the bird and flew away. So, students, what have we done? We have marked the subordinate clauses with that bracket there. Now, what do? We look at the main clause. So, here, the main clause is marked with green. I knew, I slept, and the third one, as I said, the main clause is in two parts, the bird and flew away. So, together, the bird flew away becomes the main clause. Students, we have identified main clause and subordinate clause. But now the next step, very important, is to identify the type of subordinate clause. So, to identify the three different types of subordinate clauses, that is whether it is noun, adjective or adverb, and which type of adverb clause, what do? Ask questions to the main clause so that the answer is the subordinate clause. So you have to ask a question to the main clause in such a way that the answer lies in the subordinate clause. Students, very, very, very important. And believe me, if you do this, you will get all your answers right. Now, what are the questions? The questions are as follows. What? Noun clause. That means if you ask the question what to your main clause and you get the answer as the subordinate clause, then it is definitely a noun clause. Then we have when, we have which, adjective clause. Okay, so if you ask the question which, your answer will be an adjective clause. If you ask the question when, where, how, of course not all three together. If you ask the question when, you get adverb clause of time. If you ask the question where and your answer is the subordinate clause, it is adverb clause of place. Similarly with how, you get adverb clause of manner. But you must be wondering, we have 9 types of subordinate adverb clauses. So how do we understand or recognize the remaining 6 types? Simple, students, but we are going to do that a little later. Okay, so we stop here and we are actually going to follow this step 3 with these 3 sentences in the next module. Thank you.